Amy, thank you so much for joining us on the You're Not Alone podcast today. I have been super excited for this episode. We were talking about this before I hit record, but I was like telling my wife, I was like, how do I message Amy to get her on the show again? And I was like a kid in a candy store looking through your Instagram, and I think Kate had seen you speak, and that was what immediately I was just like, have to have her on the show. I think you have a very powerful story. And so with that in mind, I want to pass it off to you to sort of talk about that dark period in your life. And there's a quote that I have here written down, which I may or may not read off. We'll see where the conversation goes.
You should. Why not?
I love it. Well, so you talked about this on your Instagram. You said it's one of your favorite quotes. You said, "The dark does not destroy the light. It defines it. It's our fear of the dark that casts our joy into the shadows." And that's a quote by Brene Brown. And then at the bottom of that, you said 6 years, 7 months, 4 days, which I calculated from that post to now is actually now 6 years, 8 months, and 18 days.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Yes. So I want to hear that story. And I think my audience would benefit from hearing about that dark period, because I resonated with that. I had a very dark spot in my life, 2016 through 2018, where at points in time I no longer wanted to be alive. And so I think there are a lot of people that resonate with that and are in that spot themselves. So I'm just curious, can you take us back there?
Yeah. So, man, especially right now, I think this is so appropriate for what's happening in the country right now as far as the opioid epidemic and the amount of people who are dying at such a high rate, that you don't get to see a lot of people on the other side of opiate addiction and addiction in general. And so, this is something that I used to be ashamed of. I would say,
me too.
Yeah, this is not something that like I would announce to people just meeting them for the first time, but it's changed since my view on addiction has changed and my view on recovery has changed. But I was always an athlete. So I grew up playing soccer. Running track. I ended up going to UC Irvine on a soccer scholarship, and I ended up running track and cross country there. So I was participating in 3 sports at the Division I level.
Wow.
Like a total badass, right?
That is badass.
Yeah.
I didn't know that either. That is actually wild.
Yeah.
I mean, Kate and I have worked out with you before, so it's not shocking, but that's impressive, I have to say. Very impressive.
But what I will say is the mentality that it takes, like the mental strength that it takes to be an athlete at such a high performing level, is the exact mentality that got me out of death. So I was playing 3 sports at the Division I level. I was on the dean's list. I mean, I was like your star student athlete, right? And my senior year of college was my last season that I was running track. And I had a stress fracture in my pelvis from overtraining, from running. And so my coaches at the time said, well, you can either sit out your season or, you can run and we can just manage it. And of course, I had to run. It was my last season. I wasn't going to just sit on the bench,
Right.
And that decision, Zach, changed the course of my life forever.
Yeah.
So, I ran. I ended up PRing that year in the mile.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a 4:36.
You ran a mile in 4:30. I just saw on Instagram that some guy that's like Olympian status. That's
not quite. I'm
well, not anymore. This guy, but he ran it. He ran a sub 4, and everybody was losing their minds. So,
well, to be fair, it's a 1500 in college. It's not 16, so it's 100 meters short. So if you tacked on an extra 100 meters to that, I was probably would be just under 5. But
If we're being technical,
if we're being technical, but like, I guess I could just take it, Okay. So
with a stress fracture in your freaking pelvis, I mean, I think that if anything, that knocks off more time, right?
Right. So I graduate and I am no longer a student athlete. I'm no longer this like really important person who everybody knows is an athlete. I'm no longer making grades to dictate my progress and value in society. And I don't have a very, full packed to the T schedule anymore.
Right.
And I have this injury. And I'm not receiving free, athletic training anymore, where I'm having like the best PTs like work on me after every practice, after every race, whatever.
Right.
I'm just that's it. Right. On to the next.
Yep.
And at the time, I didn't realize what was happening to me. I didn't realize that I had a major identity crisis going on, which, giving up that piece of my life it's all I've ever known. And I think that in and of itself is something that more college athletes struggle with than we know of. And it's a very hard subject to talk about. And so I was put on pain meds, and one thing led to another. And I realized that these pain meds were numbing the way that I was feeling, which I wasn't understanding what I was feeling, but it took that pain away. Right. And it also took the physical pain away. During that time, my mom got diagnosed with cancer. And my mom is my best friend. I mean, we're super tight. And my mom gets diagnosed with cancer, and that was gnarly. And also at the time I was in a pretty emotionally abusive relationship. And
was that, out of curiosity, was the relationship, were you in that relationship when you were in college, or it happened? Okay. So it's almost like the perfect storm.
I was just going to say, it was the perfect storm. It was like, my self-worth was so low, but I didn't know it. Like, I didn't understand it. Right. And so from there, it kind of spiraled over the next 4 years into a full-blown heroin addiction. And I might add that during the time of my addiction, I was building my career and my name in fitness in a way that like I was happening so fast. Yeah. And I had this secret and this like, I lived in this like prison in my mind. Yeah. Nobody else knew. Right. I had people wanting me. I want to look like you. I want to be like you. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, no, you don't. I fucking hate myself. Yeah. Right. Like, you don't want to look like me. What do you eat? I'm like, drugs. Like, that's what I eat.
Yeah. Yeah. Was it like constant? Were you constantly consuming? Was it just like like even when you were training people? And I hid my addiction for 4 years. Yeah. I was a functional drug addict, which is funny because really, is anyone a functioning drug addict? But the reason I say that is because I never lost my home. I never missed work. I excelled in my career. Yeah. I had all of these attributes as an athlete to just like not give up. You have to show up. You have to do your work. You have to, or people are going to see you. People are going to see you. Okay.
So as long as you keep this up, nobody's going to know.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So, I'm going to skip all the details because really the details don't matter, but fast forward, okay, to 2015. Okay. Towards the end of 2015 was when the heroin use started getting really bad. Okay. I never shot it. I would smoke it. I should be dead with the amount that I was doing. how I never missed a day of work. I don't know. But I remember, and this might be like TMI, but I remember driving to Fullerton at the time because I was like dope sick. Because I would try and stop. But I couldn't because I would get so sick. And I'm like, I can't get this sick because then I'm not going to be able to make it to work. Right. It's always like, okay, maybe I'll do it over the weekend. No, I can't. I have this to do over the weekend. I'm not going to be able, it was just putting it off. And
yep.
So I was to the point where like I needed to use every like 3 hours. Otherwise I'm like shaking and cold and like sick.
Yep.
So I'm sitting in my car and I just picked up from a dealer. And I look at my eyes in the rearview mirror of the car and I was just staring at myself and I'm like, please, God, please help me do something because I don't know what to do and I can't stop. A week later, I went to my parents' house. My mom was like, why don't you come home for dinner? We haven't seen you in a while. At that point I was pushing everybody away, but still like maintaining some sort of like,
facade. Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I got an overnight bag. My parents live in Santa Clarita. I was in Costa Mesa at the time. And so I brought just a duffel bag with a pair of clothes and my contact lenses, my glasses, whatever, and the rest of my drugs. And I went to my parents' house. And as soon as I walked in the door, it was a full-blown intervention.
Oh, damn. So they had known.
Yes. Yeah.
Had they brought it up to you before that they knew, or was it a complete and total surprise? It was a complete total surprise. Yeah. Yeah.
Which my parents, they know me, like they know when something's not right. And I was in a really unhealthy relationship. And it was just like, my parents knew that they needed to save me because I needed them. And I didn't know how to ask because of the shame around it. This college athlete, super successful in the fitness industry, just straight A student, just a full on junkie, like shame. Right. So I walk in the door. I was like, oh my God, I know exactly what's happening. And before anyone could say anything, I said, yes, I'll go. And I felt like I had asked for that. Right. I asked God for that. And I was like, oh my God, like this is the first time that I really can feel my prayer being answered. Right. Of course, it doesn't look like me just like stopping on my own. But I said, yeah, where am I going? How long? What's going to happen to my apartment? What's going to happen? And my mom and dad were like, don't worry about it. We'll handle it. You just need to like get better.
Yeah. Yeah. This story is making me tear up on my end too. It's so funny. Our timelines line up completely the same.
Really?
Yeah. Like oddly close. And I remember praying to God for a sign too. I'm reading a book called Sacred Pace right now. I don't know if you've heard of this book, but
no.
He talks about the sacred timing of God, like how it works, like prayers are like the timing of things just work in mysterious ways.
But you have to be like willing to like see it and listen.
Yes.
And I'm telling you, Zach, like since that moment of surrender, the last 7 years of my life have been unbelievable.
Yes.
They've been unbelievable.
You're giving me chills over here.
I know.
It makes me so happy. I mean, it's I get it because it's been the same for me. Like ever since those dark days, like my life has been not nothing but there's still peaks and valleys, but the trajectory is in a positive direction versus the other way.
And it's also like a lot of that kind of divine timing and stuff too. You know, and when people make these huge life changes, they expect that nothing bad is going to happen to them anymore. And it's like, I never was like naive enough to think that, because I've definitely experienced like super shitty things and super shitty people and situations, but it's my outlook and my ability to look at everything as that it's happening for me rather than to me. Yeah. Right. Like, everything, no matter how shitty or great it is, it's all happening for me instead of, you know, me just existing with it.
That was one of the first phrases that somebody said to me when I was initially diagnosed with OCD. So that was, I don't know how much you know my story, but that was my path. So severe anxiety, deep depression, then at my lowest moments, thoughts of suicide from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to bed. And Why Me was just playing on repeat in my head. Why me? Why does this have to be my reality? Why do I have to have this chronic brain diagnosis? Why does this have to be my burden to bear? This is so unfair. Victim. And somebody came into my life and was like, nothing happens to you. Everything is always happening for you. And that, it was like, at first I was like, F you. Like, that's, you don't
like, you're like, you don't fucking know me.
Yeah. You don't know me, bro. You don't know me.
Yeah.
But
my shit's worse. What I'm going through, I'm terminally unique.
Wow. Amen to that too, right? Where you just feel like you're the only one, right? You're the only one. And, and you're the victim in it. And I'm always delicate with that, because I don't think people like being called victims. But at some point in my life, that was the mentality that I was living from in that dark place. And and I don't think I would have ever gotten out of that if I would have maintained that mentality of why me, because I would have never taken ownership.
And speaking of that victim mentality, you know, you said you don't like to tell people they're victims. That is my driving force behind the psychology of why I do what I do. I'm not going to tell you you're a victim. I'm going to show you so that you can see, and then we can adjust accordingly. You know?
Wait, I love that. I love that. So gosh, I had a direction that I wanted to take this podcast, but now I'm feeling so compelled to just let this thing flow where it goes naturally. So I guess let's just see what happens. Let's just see what happens. So your parents, they have the intervention, and you're like, I will go. Like, I'm
like, yes, I'm going. I ended up going to this treatment center in Los Angeles called Beit Teshuva. It's just a rad Jewish treatment center. You don't have to be Jewish to go there, but like, it's my people, you know?
I love it.
Yeah. And it's like, I go there as like a 27-year-old woman, and I lived there. I lived in rehab as a 27-year-old woman for 7.5 months.
Yeah. What was that like?
At first, I was like, why the fuck did I do this? Get me out of here. I'll stay here for 30 days. And then I'm going back to my life that I created. That's so important, because I'm important, because I've done something with my life and these people haven't, and I'm different. And I had a spiritual counselor tell me, because this place was very spiritual, very much so, using like the Torah, and using it kind of as a parallel to like addiction and like real life. And it was just very cool. It turned out to be very cool, because at first I was like, fuck this place.
Yeah.
This place is disgusting. Like, people are wearing pajamas all the time, you know? And then I had a spiritual counselor tell me, don't leave before the magic happens. And I was like, what the fuck does that mean?
Wow.
But me not being a quitter, right? Me being like, okay, well, I know how to show up to things. I know how to show up. So I am just going to put everything that I know that's in me in this process. So 2 days before I was supposed to discharge from treatment, I called my mom. And I knew my mom was hoping that I would stay longer, but she wasn't going to force me. Like, I'm an adult, you know? And I called her and I said, I'm not going back to Orange County ever again. And she was super happy, of course, that I decided to stay. And so within 48 hours of me discharging from there, I terminated my lease. I gave my parents a power of attorney so that they could go to my apartment, break the lease, move all my shit out. I ended that relationship that I was in. I called my job at the time. At the time, it was a very successful fitness studio. And I said, I'm not coming back.
What's running through your head? Because these are like, in and of it, like each isolated one by itself is a big thing. Like breaking a lease, people call friends to go get dinner and talk about that and like struggle with that and grapple with that. People struggle for years terminating a relationship, a breakup, like quitting a job, like you just did it, boom, all at once. So what's going through your head?
I knew that God was working in my life. I felt like I just felt his hand. And I was like, if I'm going to make it alive out of this, like I have to like give everything up and start over.
Yes.
Because everything that I have was built on faulty ground and it was going to crumble anyways. So I said, I can do this again. I can rebuild, but this time I'm going to rebuild on solid ground. And I stayed in treatment for 7.5 months. And then I ended up going back to school. I went to UCLA to get my education for my license as a counselor. And I worked at the treatment center that I was a resident at. And they ended up hiring me for $13 an hour.
Got you on that cheap.
Well, I was, I was like, it's okay. I'm getting well. It's okay.
It was your path.
And I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I'll work for $13 an hour. And in that, was a huge lesson in humility for me. I mean, massive, right? I went from making $100 an hour to $13 an hour.
Yep.
Took out loans to go to school and just started to rebuild my life. I ended up developing a mind and body wellness program for this treatment center. And it integrated, right? My passions are, nutrition and exercise. But now I wasn't using nutrition and exercise to look a certain way anymore. It was now I can help people feel a certain way. And the byproduct is looking different, right? Is looking better. So my philosophy on fitness changed when I was creating this program, which I now have implemented at 3 treatment centers.
That's amazing. That is so amazing.
Yeah. Well, and it's a model of treatment that's underutilized because we live in the most over-medicated country in America. And rather than looking at someone as a whole person, right? What's their gut health like? What's their eating habits like? What's their sleeping habits like? What are their exercise habits like? We just treat the symptoms here.
Yeah.
We don't treat the root. And so the root of addiction obviously is very complicated. But the healing process from it is not.
So let me ask you something. On the note of the root, have you unearthed what the root was for you?
Relationships. interpersonal romantic relationships was my root, and my self-worth, right? So my self-worth, I didn't have a self-worth that was so low to the point where I was vocalizing that I deserve to be treated like shit and I deserve to be in abusive relationships. Nobody does that, right? It was much more subconscious in the way that, in the decisions that I would make, or, in the way that I would carry myself, because I had self-esteem in many areas of my life, right? I had self-esteem as an athlete. I had self-esteem in my job. I had self-esteem as a student. I had self-esteem, in the kitchen because I'm a great cook. But
we've seen the videos on Instagram. You better believe. Y'all, for everybody listening, you go to Amy Green's Instagram, you gonna see some videos.
That's right.
Those are hilarious, by the way. They're great.
Yeah. They're hysterical.
I'm like amazed at how you can even put those, like, that takes a lot of creativity and effort, I have to say, because it's like you're actually making a recipe and you're being funny doing it.
Listen,
that's two different skills. That is two different skills.
Right? And I have self-esteem in both of those areas, but I didn't have self-esteem in the partners that I was choosing. And when I was in treatment, I was working on this with my therapist, which it was just the most fucking aha moment ever. Right.
Yeah.
And like, I consider myself someone who's very insightful and I know how to connect the dots, but there was this thing that I did not connect the dots to. And it's that the people that I was choosing based on my low self-esteem were people that I was not going to leave because my self-esteem was so low. So I had to escape the relationship somehow. And my escape was through using opiates, right? Because opiates are just the number, right? I'm numb to it all. And at least I have someone here who, I think they love me, or I don't know, but like they haven't left me yet. And, and so I stay and I escape through using drugs. And when I learned that about myself, I was like, well, I don't have to be that way anymore.
Yeah.
I can have standards.
Was that pattern existent? Like when you connected the dots looking back, was it existent?
My whole life.
Your whole life. Okay.
My whole life. And, it's funny because my parents are still married. They have a pretty good relationship, but, I grew up watching my mom and dad argue, and like my dad, be not so nice to my mom and vice versa. But, and they could have probably done well with therapy of their own, but they're of the generation that doesn't
of course
with that,
Yeah, we can all benefit from therapy. That's a huge, got to plug that.
Right.
But
my dad was never abusive to my mom and vice versa. So, early on, I learned somewhere that like, that was okay. Or this person loves me, I think. And so that was my pattern from high school all the way up until Daniel.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I always say that like the man that I'm about to marry, Daniel is the culmination of everything right I did for myself.
Can you expand on that?
Law of attraction.
Yeah.
Right. If you're a mixed bag, you're going to attract a mixed bag, right? If you're a fucking mess, you're going to attract a fucking mess, but it may show up differently, right? It may not be on the outside, but it's more on the inside.
Definitely.
And I learned that it's okay to speak your needs and desires, because I was always afraid to have a voice and I was always afraid to communicate because I was afraid of what? Being abandoned or
loss of love,
being yelled at, being whatever it is. So when I found that it's okay to have a voice and that I I don't have to stay with someone or stay silent when there's something that I don't like.
Yeah.
You know, there's something that's rubbing me the wrong way. Someone who has self-worth and self-esteem is going to bring that to the other person's attention. But I also learned that communication also has to be delicate. Like, I can't just be like, you're fucking pissing me off. Right. Like, it needs to be, it needs to be more well thought out, because we're all learning, right? Everyone's always learning. And I think that men and women, our communication styles are so different.
Yeah.
That, you know, it's only fair for Daniel and vice versa if I'm able to articulate and explain myself in a loving way to him. Right.
I've learned. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
I 100% know what you're saying. It's amazing that you say that, because I've seen that. I always considered Kate and I a loving relationship, but we would have arguments from time to time, just like I think any couple does. But
sure.
I realized that sometimes in those arguments that my communication style was fueling a further argument. And ever since I came to that realization, and obviously for everyone listening, this is just me, I guess, airing out some relationship stuff.
It's fine. You got Counselor Amy here.
Yes, Counselor Amy here, y'all. Check her out on IG. By the way, I tapped through every last one of those stories on the little wellness tab on Instagram. I love it. Counselor Amy.
Yes.
So fantastic. But it just changing the communication style has been just leaps and bounds so helpful.
But I couldn't learn these things. Like, these tools were not in my toolbox.
Yeah.
Until I consciously made a decision to dive into the work of changing my life.
So let's talk about that, because I've decided that's the direction we're going to take this, because your story is just, it hits right here, you know? So you're rock bottom. You get to the month 2 days before the 30 days and you're like, I'm staying. You freaking wipe the slate clean. You're like, I'm starting clean. I can rebuild from the ground up. There's going to be people listening to this episode now that are like, I'm inspired. This is where I'm at. Where do we start, Amy? Tell me. So how did you go about starting to rebuild and change your life?
Well, so that first step was just surrendering, right? It was like, all right, I give up. I'm ready to take direction, right? And I needed to take direction from people who knew better than I did. And so that was another lesson in humility, right? I'm used to telling people what to do, what to eat, how to work out, how to train your body. And like, I just said, clearly my best thinking has gotten me in the worst position of my life. So I'm ready to take direction. So I took direction from my spiritual counselor, from my therapist, from friends that I started to make in that community, and my rabbi, who he's not your typical rabbi, I'll tell you that much. He's an ex-con. And
okay.
He's man, you should have him on your show. I'll tell you that much.
I will. If you think he's going to be a good guest. Rabbi Mark. I love it. Okay.
Because I had such an ego problem.
That was the word just running around in my head when you talk about surrender, because you have to surrender the ego.
And I thought I was sometimes, but I had Rabbi Mark calling me out on my bullshit and calling me out and calling me down and breaking my ego down and down and down until I was just like, okay. And then I'm able to rebuild, right? Because now I have this place that I'm going to start building from, which is a place of I really want to live a better life.
Yeah.
Right. And I want to live a better life. And I also want to use this experience to help other people. And I know that sounds cheesy as fuck, because that's what everyone always says. Oh, I just want to help people. But
I mean, that was what I was telling myself too down in Raleigh. So it's, I mean, and here we are. So there you go.
But the reason I want to is because you and me, Zach, we don't go through what we've gone through, the most fucking painful, lows of lows, suicidal, manic, depressive, crazy. We don't go through these things to just go through them and then die. Right. We go through these things so that we can come out on the other side and then show someone else that it's possible. And then we can help you do it.
Right. 100%. It had to mean something. Yes. That's what I kept telling myself. I was like, this has to mean something to me. Like, I'm not just like, this isn't just some random thing that's happened that I have to somehow push behind me in the past. Like, this is, I'm sure you feel the same way, but like, this is defining. This is like a moment that I'll never forget. This isn't just like, oh, I stubbed my toe on a door once when I was 6. Like,
so I want to be a foot doctor.
Exactly. Exactly. Right. This like stays with you.
It's purpose driven. Have you ever read that book, Purpose Driven Life?
No, I have not, but I'm almost 150% sure that book is, I have a full, like, these is just some of the books. I've got like the big plastic Tupperware shit that you get from wherever, Target or whatever, stacked with books. So it's in there somewhere. Somebody told me that I need to read that book at some point.
And here's the second thing. I'm going to circle this back, right? So I get to show someone now that being a victim to circumstance is not going to be helpful. Right? Being a victim to your own circumstance, by your own making, by life's making, whatever you want to call it, is not going to be helpful. Right. And then that second piece is finding your purpose. Yeah. So once you get out of victim mode, then you start to discover what your purpose is. Right. And then from taking yourself out of being a victim to then deciding what your purpose is. And then it's momentum after that.
So let me ask you something real quick, because I do want to talk about purpose, and I think people listening, I'm writing these down. I always keep a little
we're all over the place, and this is how my brain works. So I
keep that pen on me. You never know when somebody's gonna say something. You gotta write down. I keep that thing on me. So let's talk about out of victim mode real quick, right? Because sometimes people don't know that they're in victim mode, right? When I was why me mentality, I was just existing from that place. So how does one hit the pause button? They're in dark moment right now. They're in their version of their rock bottom, and they're playing why me mentality in their head, or they're operating out of a victim mentality. How does one become aware of that?
The first thing I ask my clients, right, when they're in why me mode is, why not you? Why not?
Yeah.
So that gets the brain thinking of, well, I mean, I don't know. Right.
Yeah.
So it's asking that question. So you're going to ask why me? And I'm going to ask you, why not you?
Yeah.
But what about you, shouldn't be experiencing this, and why? Right? And then that second part of that is, so it's, why not you? And what's the lesson? Like, what is the lesson here?
Yeah.
Because how the fuck are people supposed to deal with and rationalize traumatic events, horrible things that happen to them, right? It's so easy to get stuck in the, why the fuck did this happen to me? How could this happen to me? But,
which is all thoughts that were running through my head, by the way. So you are speaking to people that their light bulbs are going off right now, because that's human.
To quote the podcast, they're not alone, right? You're not alone.
Yep.
No one on this earth has never been in victim mode, but it's like, why not you? And then where's the lesson in all this, right? And even if you can't see the lesson in front of your face because you're too clouded, right, by emotion, the lesson is going to come. And so, but you have to be willing to look for it.
Yeah.
And
you definitely do.
Well, and that helps people kind of zoom out, right? Like,
Yeah.
So, okay, their world is this big right now, but when you ask them like what the lesson is, then the world, well, I don't know, well, maybe it's this, or maybe it's this. The world starts to get a little bit bigger, right?
Yeah.
And you get farther away from the problem itself, and then you're able to kind of look around at, the environment of the problem.
Yes.
If that makes sense. I know it's getting a little woo-woo, but
no, it does. It does make sense. And there's a bit of trusting the process in there to what we were talking about before we hit record, where were you during, was the 7 months that you were there at treatment, is that where you were sort of killing the ego and surrendering?
Yes. That was the first year of sobriety for me. Recovery was that surrender process. The second year was about rebuilding.
Okay.
And like starting to formulate like a plan of action of how I was going to like function in society. Right.
Yeah.
And then, that third year was everything that I had learned year 1, year 2, and started to apply in year 2. That third year was when like the magic started happening in my life.
Which is what your spiritual counselor told you, let the magic happen.
Yeah.
When you were inpatient, because I do think people will be curious, you were meeting with a spiritual counselor, you were meeting with some other sort of therapist, the rabbi. What did a day look like for you?
A day was, so we would wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning. Every morning at 8 a.m. we would have Torah study for an hour. And it was the men and the women. We would all come into the sanctuary, and Rabbi would give Torah study. And Torah study was basically taking like a book from, the Old Testament, or the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and grabbing a story from that and then kind of relating it to recovery. And it was awesome. Okay. Yeah. After that, we would then have our first group. Usually it was like the home group. It was like the check-in. How's everybody doing? How's it going? Then an hour later, after that group, we would have another group. And sometimes that it would either be like about relationships, or it would be, God, it's been so long. But I would say we had 3 groups a day.
Yeah, like a group session where it was a bunch of you sitting around together talking about a specific topic. related to recovery.
Yes, okay. Related to recovery, and also related to like life outside the walls of treatment. Yep. And then during that week, so I'd have 3 groups a day plus Torah study, and I was always making it to the gym. You know that.
So they had a gym there. You could work out there.
Yeah, they had a gym. It was very small. It was probably the size of my living room, and it was jam packed with equipment. So there was like no room, but like I was making sure I was getting it in. Because that was helping me. It was helping my mentality. It was giving me like that boost of like serotonin. And because when you withdraw off of heroin or opiates or anything like that, you are like the chemical depression that happens after that is real.
Oh yeah, right? Definitely. Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Because it's all chemicals. I just listened to a podcast on what happens to our brains chemically when we consume alcohol. Don't quiz me on it, but it was just really insightful. Huberman Lab, for anybody interested in the sort of the podcast that I've been digging into lately, is Huberman Lab. But he's a neuroscientist out of Stanford, and he was dissecting the hell out of alcohol. I mean, I still drink occasionally, but he made me never want to touch another drop of alcohol again. So,
oh God.
Yeah. It's not good for your brain. I'll just put it that way. But to your point, yes, when you're coming off of heroin, there's an actual chemical process that's taking place in the brain, and
it's so terrible.
Yeah.
Because it's not like you can speed up the healing process, but you can alleviate the anxiety and the depression like momentarily with exercise. And so that's kind of also where I started to reformulate my approach to fitness. Yeah. Is for the mental health side of things.
Right. You started, I have a whole chapter in my book talking about that. I don't even really lift for my body. And you're going to be like, well, no shit, Zach, we can all tell. That's every time I say that. That's what my friends say. They're like, yeah, Zach, trust me. We know you're not lifting for your body. You're definitely.
Listen, I've trained you. You're fine.
I hang in there. I'm somewhere right there in the middle, you know, somewhere right there. Washed up athlete. But I work out for my brain. I mean, I just feel better on a day when I exercise. That's just what it is. So when you were in there, 3 group sessions, study, you were getting a workout in, and anything else you think people should know?
I mean, if there's anyone who's listening right now that's contemplating going to treatment or contemplating getting help for themselves, or if you're on the fence with someone you know who might need help, going to treatment is, to me, is one of the biggest tools, right? And especially like California, for example. California has a lot of state funded programs. California has a lot of taxpayer dollars that have hopefully gone to, this epidemic and for, nonprofits to help people with their drug addiction. So there's definitely resources in California, but what I want to say is that that's the biggest tool, right? That's how you separate yourself from your environment. Because if there is going to be real significant change, people need to be completely removed from their environment and plopped into a safety zone, right? And for me, I think that most people in this world need to go to rehab, and not because they're struggling with addiction in particular,
right,
but to hit pause on your life, and have this certain amount of time where you just get to fucking work on yourself, is just a massive gift. And I'll say this too: addiction has a bad rap, specifically drugs and alcohol, but you do not, like, people who are addicts do not have to be addicted to drugs and alcohol, right? There's fame, money, sex, food, gambling, video games, validation. I mean, shopping, right?
Right.
Addiction is a spectrum. Addiction, there's no face of it, right? There's no face of addiction. And I think that the stigma is the worst with drugs and alcohol, because although it is a quicker death, I think that people can be addicted to anything, and to live a life of recovery doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be sober, right?
Right.
It means that you're actively choosing to live in a spiritually fulfilled way.
I saw you post about this on Instagram and I loved it. It because it is true. And I love how you talk about it as a spectrum, because I don't think, myself included, until you just said it now, that I would have thought about it as a spectrum, but it is a spectrum. And when you think about it through that context, I think every single human is addicted to something at that point, right? There's something that there's something that we could benefit on working on to create a different relationship and detachment from that thing that we're addicted to, that holds power and sway over us.
Well, where's the void, right? You have to identify where the void is. And so, and that's also like part of staying out of victim mentality, is taking ownership of the fact that there is something missing. There's something missing. Okay. And that's okay, because everybody's got something missing. Yeah. But now it's time to find out what's missing, and how do we change the course of how we're dealing with that void. Yeah. Right. And being addicted to the why me, like maybe in your situation, you didn't realize you were addicted to that mentality.
Definitely. Well, I think it's interesting that you bring that up, because I don't know what drives somebody. I guess you somehow get there. Maybe when I was in that place, I felt helpless. So it felt easy to play that card. But at a certain point, when I was getting the same result over and over again, I was like, something's got to change. Like I remembered it, yeah, exactly. And I remember the exact moment. I was sitting in my car outside of work, still just as depressed and anxious as ever, and thinking to myself, the way I've been thinking hasn't worked.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to make some sort of change or nothing is going to change.
Let me ask you this question. This is another tool.
Yes, love it.
When you finally were kind of addressing these things and you came into contact with people who were experiencing the exact same thing that you were experiencing,
Mm-hmm.
did you find a little bit of peace in having some community and connection with other people who shared a similar affliction?
100%. I write about it in my book. I remember the
Community.
first time. Yeah, community, for sure.
The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection.
Mm.
So connection, there's your other tool, right? Is speaking up, having the self-worth to speak up, because just like what we're doing right now, like, I don't know, this might help somebody. It might not. I don't know. But
yeah, it's gonna help somebody. I don't have a doubt about it. It's going to. It's a powerful story, but you're so right. And when you were dropped into that environment, you got immediately a built-in community.
Just the most accepting, and I didn't have to hide anymore, right? I didn't have to pretend anymore. I was used to pretending when I was trying to hide my addiction and be like a fitness star, like,
yeah.
And I didn't have to do that anymore. And it was there I learned the power of transparency and that, like, okay, it would be selfish of me to not share my story. It would be selfish of me to hide this part of myself because it's embarrassing, or, what are people going to think of me? But, I've never, to this day, I've never gotten a bad reaction to being honest.
Yeah.
No,
neither have I. I think people appreciate the vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
So like it gives them a path too for them. Or if it's somebody listening, it's empowering to hear where you are in your life now.
Yeah. Wouldn't trade any of it. Would not trade any of it.
So let me ask you this, because you talked about year 1 was out of victim mentality. Year 2 was purpose, rebuilding and purpose. Did you have a sort of a process for that, or how did it sort of unfold in that sense? I mean, you clearly had an athletic background, so you always had fitness. So I have to assume that there was something inside of you pointing you in that direction. I've always, and this is something that I can always attribute to sports. Right. And being an athlete of just knowing that as long as I keep putting one foot in front of the other and like I'm doing the next right action, then things are going to fall into place. Right. And if something doesn't feel right, then I don't do it. And I have to listen to that intuition. Yeah.
And I think that, for me, I didn't have a fucking choice, dude. I was either die or like live just exist in a life that I hated until I was dead. Like, I think it was like the option for me was either death or like turn this shit around.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want to die. So that was fueling me,
Yep, definitely.
You get it.
I've been there. Death is a powerful tool. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. So I would say that's kind of like my mentality was like, you don't have a choice and what you're doing is not going to hurt you anymore. So keep moving forward. And thank God I did.
Yeah, seriously. So did it just, I guess, your rebuilding was just slowly moving in the direction of
it was saying yes to working for $13 an hour. It was saying yes to living in a not so great part of LA that I could afford. It was saying yes to being of service. And like, if someone needed a ride because I had a car, they needed a ride to a doctor's appointment. It was yes, and I think that for me, was that year, like that's year 2 going into 3 was like, be of service and just, continue to put one foot in front of the other. And, within a few years, I ended up moving back to Orange County. I took a wonderful job at a studio in 2018. And I worked at that studio and continued to build, right, my career in fitness. And I continued to build my community, and I continued to share my story, because I never thought that I was going to have a do-over in Orange County.
Yeah.
I was like, I'd be cool if I didn't have one, because I was afraid to go back. And I got my do-over, and I did it justice. I will tell you that. I did that do-over justice, because I needed to clean that chapter up. Like I needed to clean my side of the street from Orange County, prior to when I went into recovery. And God gave me the opportunity to do that. And that all stemmed from that, that year of turning my purpose and my surrender and purpose into action.
This feels like a really good part in the podcast to ask you what advice you would give somebody who's listening right now to get started on their journey to recovery.
Ask for help. That is number 1, because we're not meant to go through stuff alone. You're not meant to take it all and shoulder it all. Ask for help. And that's if you have a family member or a friend or me. I mean, my DMs are always open. And you
open DM policy.
Yeah. Open to slide up in there. Only for help though. I would say ask for help, because most people don't know what the fuck to do, Zach. They don't know what to do, and they're ashamed. So first of all, it's okay that you're ashamed, right? Like everyone's ashamed that when they're not living to their
fullest potential,
light and their potential. Yes. So
that's so, by the way, I want to pause on that real quick, because I've never heard that articulated that way. And that is just so true. Everybody is ashamed, because somewhere inside of us, we all know when we're hitting our potential and when we're not.
Yeah.
And the emotion shame is just a signaler to basically signal to you, hey, I'm making you feel this emotion because you and I both know you're not where you need to be at right now. So I'm going to make you feel a little guilt, and hopefully that gets you to take action to make a change.
Correct.
So I guess let's wrap out the advice. So don't do it alone. It's okay if you feel ashamed. That's okay. That's actually your signaler. Hey, you're not living up to your potential. Let's do something about this.
And the other part of that is it's surrender to the fact that it's not going to be easy, right? And anything that's worth having, right, is worth putting that effort into. But I would say that number 1, start the dialogue with someone and ask for help, because, not having the knowledge of what to do next is normal. But seek out someone who can, without judgment, just be like, all right, cool, let's go. Let's take this next step together. Yes, absolutely. I love that. So to everybody listening in, this is Amy Green. Amy, I'm so glad to have you on. I love just everything that we talked about today. I think it's so relevant and so important. Your story inspires the hell out of me. I got my workout in this morning. I was going to have a lazy afternoon after this, but who knows? Maybe we'll do something more productive. I'm feeling inspired. We'll see what happens. You have dumbbells? I don't just have random dumbbells sitting around. I was going to say, go on my Instagram and do my latest Metcon. Oh, I saw that. I saw the video. I probably won't do that today. Okay. But I will do it. Okay. That I promise you. Kate and I will do it, and we'll send you a video. Tag me.
Okay, I will. Amy, it was a pleasure having you on. We're definitely going to have to do numerous podcasts,
Yes.
but
And
thank
listen,
you.
thank you for having me. I know that like there's a structure to all this, but I think that, you know, there's so many important topics happening in life right now that,
Yes.
you know, it's important that we shine light on the ones that I think people are dealing with and struggling with the most. And that's mental health. So
Yes.
I'm here
100%.
whenever you want to do this again for the real interview.
Yes. No, this one, I tell you what, that story hits different. That story hits different. You dropped a ton of knowledge bombs. I love the surrender, get out of that victim mentality, and then just start to owning your shit and tapping into the next best version of yourself. So
Right.
You're awesome. And yes, we will talk soon.
I look forward to it.
Okay. All right, Amy.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.